Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week we're going to be talking about the Super Nintendo, otherwise known as the SNES or the Super Famicom. And really this console needs no introduction. It was one of the best from the 16-bit era. I had one, I absolutely loved it. And of course, everyone knows about the legendary competition between Sega and Nintendo during that time. So today, what we're going to do is talk about the SNES 101, otherwise known as the Super Nintendo Jr. So this was like a cost-reduced version of the system that was released in the late 90s. It's got composite video in the back, and it's got no power light indicators. And people really look for these nowadays because you can do a number of modifications to really improve the whole experience. One thing you can do is you can add RGB to this console. So normally it doesn't have it, but with a very simple modification, you can add RGB to it. And it's probably got the best or one of the best video outputs when you compare them to the various models of Super Nintendos. The other thing we're going to do with this one is just as a preventative measure, we're going to go ahead and replace all of the electrolytic capacitors. This is a really easy one to work on. There's only about 8 or 9 caps on a Super Nintendo Jr., so this should be a pretty quick and straightforward thing. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and we're going to install a power LED into this console. It just makes it a lot nicer to use because you have that LED that just gives you the reassurance that it's actually being powered up. I'm going to show you a way to do it that makes it really look kind of official and like as if the console always had a power LED to begin with. All right, so let's take this thing apart and let's get started. Okay, so taking this thing apart is very easy. When you flip it over, you've got 4 game bit security screws that you have to remove. You can get these pretty easily through Amazon, these game bit screwdrivers. And then once you lift off the shell, you can see just how tiny this thing is. It's pretty impressive how small it is. And then the rest of it is just all Phillips screws. There's 3 of them that are long like this and they're white. The rest of them are kind of like a goldish color and they're smaller, just like that. And so you just got to go ahead and work your way through and pull all those out. It just has a top RF shield like this, and I'm just going to call your attention to this large chip right here. So this version of the Super Nintendo has something called a one chip. So with the later revisions, what Nintendo did was they consolidated the CPU and the 2 PPU chips, so these 3 chips, they put them together into this one chip right here. And these consoles are known for having really, really crisp RGB. It looks a lot better than some of the earlier versions of the Super Nintendo. So this has it. So once you add RGB to this console, it looks absolutely phenomenal. Now, someone else has actually already gone through the trouble of installing an RGB modification to this console. So what I'm going to do is just kind of flip the board over and kind of show you how these work. Now, there's a number of different companies that make this. This is just one example here by Voltar. And so what you see here is this is where the SNES multi-out is. And so you just solder it into place right over where the multi-out was. And then you've got 4 wires right here. So this taps into RGB and C-Sync. And then from there, you're just going to route those to their respective pads on the chip, or on the mod board right here. This particular one is really nice because it has access to these vias right here. There's a capacitor right here. So this is great because we're actually going to need to replace caps. So we're going to be going through this. And then over here, you see these 2 wires here. This is if you want to add S-Video to the console as well. So one of these is Luma, the other one is Chroma. And flipping the board back over here, you can see that the person who installed this, they soldered those wires to 2 legs onto this particular chip right here, which is probably the RGB encoder. So yeah, it's actually a really nice mod. It's a very simple one to do. And yeah, unfortunately, like I said, I didn't do this. This is how it came. But since it's here, I figured it would be nice to show you what it is. All right, so now that the console's out, we're going to go ahead and remove this heatsink, and let's see what we find underneath. Okay, so from here you can see that, I mean, it's really kind of nice how they organize this. All the capacitors are just very conveniently located right here underneath the heatsink. So we have 2 right here, which thankfully are still accessible because of the design of this mod board right here. So these vias right here correspond to those 2 caps. And then we've got another 6 right over here. So I'm going to go ahead and desolder those caps. And we have some Rubicon and Nichicon capacitors that we're going to use to replace these. Now, I mean, just visually inspecting them, I can tell that they're all looking fine. There's probably nothing wrong with them at all, but it's just good preventative maintenance to replace them with brand new ones, because eventually over time, all electrolytic capacitors are going to fail. And these are already pushing about 30 years, so it's time to get rid of them. Okay, so the recap is finished and everything looks good here. So I also decided just to shorten these wires a little bit. But now if we flip it over, here's our 8 new capacitors. And it was a pretty quick and straightforward process of just using the Hakko desoldering gun to remove each one, and then adding the new ones and clipping the leads. And you can see that all of them have the negative stripe facing in the same direction. And the silk screen is very clearly marked where you can see where the positive is and where the negative is supposed to be. So this is really a great board to work on if you're new to all of this recapping business. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and reattach the heatsink, and now let's turn our attention to the final thing we're going to do today, which is to install the LED. Okay, so to start, we're going to make a very minor modification to the top shell so that we basically have an opening where the light is going to be coming out. So what I like to do is drill a hole right here. So you have this little divot that's already here where the on position is. You switch up. So we're gonna make a small hole here, and the light is gonna shine straight through there. So first thing we gotta do is just take the power switch part out. You just take these two plastic pieces, you pinch them, you push, and out it goes, and goes flying. All right, so now I've got my drill here, and I've got a 1/16 inch drill bit. So what I'm going to do now is just go straight and careful and make my hole. Okay. And just make sure all that material is out of the way. And yeah, that's it. So it's nice and small, it's not obtrusive at all, and it looks like it's always meant to be there once we're done with this. All right, so the next thing we've got to do is go ahead and build our LED and wires and all of that connect to the main board. So let's get started. All right, so the next thing we need to do is solder 2 wires to this red LED that we have right here. So this is a 5mm diameter red LED, and you'll notice when you look at it that it has 2 leads. One is longer, one is shorter. So LEDs have a polarity. The positive end is called the anode, the negative end is called the cathode. And when you add an LED to an SNES Jr, you also have to pair it up with a resistor on the ground side of things. And the resistor is going to reduce the brightness of the LED. It's also going to extend the life of the LED. So I have a 470 ohm resistor right here. If you use a different value, you can either increase or decrease the brightness, just depending on which direction you go with the resistance. But 470 is a pretty commonly used one, and it's a good level of brightness. So first thing we've got to do is solder one end of these 2 pairs of wires to the resistor. So you can see that I've cut them at different lengths. This is because when I add the resistor to this wire right here, it's going to make them pretty comparable in length. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to just add a little bit of flux here. And I'm using this helping hands because it just makes things much easier to get everything into position here. Okay. All right, so that's all set. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get some heat shrink tubing, and I'm going to add that over here. And this is just to insulate and protect the resistor and this connection from bumping into anything else. So we're just going to take a small piece of this, and you can use like a hot air gun to make this stuff shrink. Personally, I just take my iron and I take like the back end of it, which is pretty darn hot, and it usually does a good job. It just saves me time, so I don't have to grab another tool to cool things down. You can also use a lighter as well if you have one of those handy, and it'll just shrink the tubing and get everything protected like how you see here. Okay, so now this is all set, and I just have this final lead right here. So this is going to be soldered to ground, and this is going to be soldered to 5 volts to power up the LED. Okay, so now we're going to take the other end of our set of wires and we're going to solder it directly to the LED. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the helping hands again to hold this in place. And I'm going to solder one wire at a time. I'm going to trim these leads to be pretty short. In fact, there's actually like an indentation on the LED that makes it like kind of easier to cut. One thing to keep in mind though is that you do have to remember which side is negative and which side is positive. If you happen to forget, what you can also do is actually look at the LED itself. There's like some kind of metal material on the inside of the LED, and the negative side is always much larger than the positive side. So just keep that in mind if you cut them to the same length and you can't remember which side is negative and which side is positive. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and hold this with my helping hands, and you can see I have some like rubber on here so I don't crush or destroy the LED. And we're gonna clip these guys to the same length, like so. And now I'm gonna add the heat shrink tubing now so that when I solder it into place, I can just slide this up and melt it and shrink it onto the LED. So I usually do one at a time. So I'm going to do positive side first. And get some flux. Okay. Okay, that's one side finished. And now let's do the ground, the negative lead. Okay, so you can see now we're ready to put this thing into its place. And so I've got the whole thing assembled, and I just slid the LED through, and it basically friction fits into place. It's really not going to go anywhere anymore. And what we're going to do is just slide this right in here. And it's just going to friction fit into this position as well. Wow, that's perfect. So yeah, you could hear that snap. It's not going anywhere. It's locked straight into here. And it doesn't interfere in any way with the power switch, which I've reattached. And so that's it. So now let's go ahead and go to the motherboard and get this thing finished. Okay, so now we're on the underside of the board, and we're going to be attaching the other ends of the LED to 2 points. So the resistor here is going to go to ground, which could be really any of these 4 posts. And then the positive lead is going to attach right over here to this pin. So let's go ahead and take care of that. Okay, all done. Let's reassemble this thing and give it a test. Okay, so I've got it all plugged in, and of course for my test cartridge, I'm using Star Fox Super Weekend. This is definitely the rarest Super Nintendo game I own. It's actually always been on Long Island, and I got this from a store called Video Game Trading Post, which is definitely the best video game store, in my opinion, on Long Island. If you're out here, definitely check it out. Okay, so let's power this thing on, and let's take a look at the LED, which is right over here. All right, that is awesome. It looks really good. So, I mean, hopefully this is coming through on camera, but in person, it looks like it was always meant to be there. It looks phenomenal. And as you guys can hear, it looks like Star Fox Super Weekend is working, and the console, of course, is working. And yeah, as it's hopefully clear on screen, the RGB looks fantastic. So overall, I really recommend this mod. It, improves the video quality of the SNES Jr. The LED is just a really nice touch, and of course, having new caps is always a good idea, just so that you can prolong the life of the console. Alright, so that's it for this week's video. If you guys like this kind of content, then consider subscribing. I have videos out every Friday, and then of course if you have a console that you need to get repaired or modified, you can always reach me directly at oneuprestorations.com. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!